What's Trending, presented by Feastbox, donating 10% of every order to Full of Hope, a charitable organization that feeds hungry families. Wild doesn't maybe even begin to describe the last 24 hours in conference realignment talk. Regarding specifically the Pac-12, what looked like their impending death as a conference, and Arizona State, maybe Utah moving to the Big 12, pushing Washington and Oregon to the Big 12. But here we are, reversing course potentially. ESPN's Pete Thamel did get its start last night when he reported that Arizona's in deep discussions with the Big 12 about joining the league. Yahoo Sports' Ross Dellinger joined the conversation when he said the Big 12 executives met Thursday to approve the application of Arizona and that decisions from Arizona State and Utah had not progressed as quickly. Dellinger also reporting that Pac-12 presidents have had positive meetings and that the grant of rights would be presented this morning. Okay. All reports made it seem as if Oregon and Washington were also Big Ten bound, while Arizona was seemingly locking themselves into the Big 12. That's just the first part, Jarom. Okay. So we are not even halfway down this path.
That's by 10 p.m. last night.
It's unbelievable, okay, how fast things are changing in this. Tides began to dramatically shift this morning when Nicole Auerbach reported that Oregon and Washington in the Big Ten lost all momentum overnight.
Well then.
Brett McMurphy added that at the last minute, the Pac-12 may stay together and sign a grant of rights.
Huh?
After Monday's media rights offer, the Pac-12 held multiple Zoom meetings this week. Arizona's Bobby Robbins appeared fully committed to the Pac-12 last night or early this morning.
What happened?
Which is, okay, that's a wildly different story than in deep discussions that were reported as of 10 p.m.
Like Messi is going to share some of his subs.
Yes. Okay, so if Arizona leaves, he should win an Oscar. Arizona beat writer Jason Scheer added that Arizona was still planning to go to the Big 12 after last night's meeting.
What?
I know. It's all over the place.
Arizona, where are you going?
Coaches, get this, coaches at Arizona were informed and it was full steam ahead.
That's when it's serious, right?
Now, we have said it's not over till it's over, but it would still be one of the most shocking turnarounds I have seen, continued Scheer.
That Arizona doesn't go.
That Arizona does not go to the Big 12. Yeah. There have been reports of a potential Pac-12 ACC merger as well from Jason Scheer.
What?
We're not expecting the Pac-12 to sign a grant of rights today. Maybe they kick that can down the road a little bit further, but
it'd be crazy to do that. Why wouldn't Oregon and Washington entertain the Big Ten a little bit? Really think this is more stable than the Big 12? This is wild.
So I went to bed last night thinking, okay, for sure Arizona is going to join the Big 12. Like the Big 12's at 14.
It felt like that.
And maybe 15 and 16 are a week or so down the road, with likely Arizona State and Utah being the two most possible or probable candidates in that regard.
They're the only ones being discussed there.
And Oregon and Washington were in talks with the Big Ten, though they were not going to get as much money to go to the Big Ten, right. And some travel concerns were out there, but they were still actively engaged in those conversations. That's what I went to bed with last night. I was like, okay, cool. In my mind, I was thinking about all of it. Like, I wouldn't be surprised to wake up and be like, okay, Arizona ratified it. They're in the Big 12.
Please make it manifest.
But it's very, very different right now, Jarom. It's this. I mean, what do you make of all of this in the last not even 24 hours?
Well, the last 90 minutes, it's felt like the Pac-12 is really trying to save this thing. Because if Arizona goes and say, if Arizona State and Utah go, hey, this thing's over. Like, yes, you'd have 6 teams left, and you could salvage something by adding San Diego State, SMU, and maybe a couple other, UNLV and Colorado State, I don't know.
Yeah.
But, like, you would be Mountain West Plus at that point, which is wild. Okay, Jason Scheer also said, sources indicate to Wildcat Authority, this is at about an hour ago, Washington's very concerned about the Apple deal, Apple Cup. They know apples, okay. Arizona and Arizona State are still on track to join the Big 12. ASU President Michael Crow is proving to be a stumbling block, but parties involved are confident it can be overcome. Yeah, if Arizona wants to go to the Big 12, they can go. But did the Pac-12 teams forget what the streaming deal is? It's not even a TV deal. It's a streaming deal. Did they forget that that's a house of cards and variable income could be less than what you're hoping for? Sure, it could be more, but let's be honest, it ain't going to be more. They're not going to get a gajillion subscribers for Pac-12 football and Apple TV. It's not going to happen. What evidence do we have that that is going to be a bigger success than the Pac-12 network itself?
We're talking about Cal and Stanford and Oregon State, like, playing a major role in that. Like, yeah, Utah will get their subscribers, Oregon and Washington will get theirs, but that's 3 big brands. Okay, maybe Washington State's got a decent following, but how many people?
Hold up, Spence. It's not about those fans subscribing. It's about fence-sitting fans subscribing.
Others.
Yes, it's not about that because they're going to be there. It's about everybody else. Like, is the average college football game...
It's about you and me.
Yes, I'm not subscribing. I'm not doing that. I'm not anti-Pac-12 either. In fact, I'm like pro-Pac-12 football. I like watching it.
I'm bugged that
late
it's
at night.
not going to be on ESPN and Fox, and it's not going to be easy to watch.
As much as we made fun of it, I enjoy watching Oregon State, Washington State at 11:29 p.m. Everybody's asleep. I'm awake. I'm still watching games.
College football.
Yes, I like that. Like I don't want the Pac-12 to completely dissolve. I just want a couple more teams in the Big 12 to secure its strength in the West and as the 3rd best league in college football and sports, and increase with Arizona men's basketball the #1 basketball conference, making it seemingly impossible for us to guarantee a single men's basketball win in the future. Like, every game will just be a huge game, right, for BYU. So there's a lot going on here. I just don't see how the Pac-12 is actually going to get this done with that primary rights deal being streaming with Apple TV.
This is unbelievable. Okay, this just tweeted out by Pete Thamel.
Oh, let's hear it.
This is unbelievable.
Let's hear it.
Sources: Washington and Oregon are fully engaged with the Big Ten. What?
Engaged meaning talking or like marriage?
Things remain fluid, but are trending in that direction.
And if they go, like if they're invited, it's
what the heck does the Pac-12 do? At that point, Michael Crow and Arizona State.
Now they're coming to the Big 12.
But then they are begrudgingly joining the Big 12, which is what I was talking about yesterday. Like, why does the Big 12 want a team that's just like, if we have to?
Well, don't take Arizona State, Utah then. Just sit at 14.
Add other teams that want to be there.
Arizona wants to be there, it feels like. Arizona State and Utah don't.
Don't really want to be there.
Don't. Brett Yormark said as much to us prior to Big 12 football media days about a month ago, where he basically said, we don't want someone just to come over because we have a better TV deal.
Yes.
And he specifically identified a number of teams, which is pretty interesting.
I think there's strength in numbers, but if we end up being at 12, that's great. I'd like to stay at 14, even with the departures of Texas and Oklahoma, candidly. We'll see if that's a possibility or not.
14 teams
so
has been the number.
Get Arizona.
They're at 13, obviously, with the recent addition of Colorado. Get Arizona. Like, why?
Then you're good.
Why, if Arizona is like so far down the road and they're clearly interested, at least a good majority of the people that make the decisions over there, in joining the Big 12 enough to get to a point where Big 12 officials are getting together and...
There was one report that last night, Big 12...
approved it?
Basically. I don't know if that is exactly what we think it is, which is, Shane Reese, BYU's president, is one of the votes and says, yes, I approve this. So they unanimously did that with Colorado, and it quickly happened.
It wouldn't be any different with Arizona. Yeah, I'm just sure they unanimously approved it. I guarantee it's like, yes, you're in if you want to be here. I think Arizona does want to be there, but
and the Big 12 wants Arizona. I think it's a good fit.
Maybe Arizona's play is just waiting to see if Oregon and Washington go to the Big Ten, because then Arizona doesn't become the linchpin.
They don't want to be the
They don't want to start the chasm. To crack it
USC
open.
and UCLA started the chasm. Texas and Oklahoma started
the chasm. Like, why are we so worried about? But it's like, well, the Pac-12 is still together technically, even without USC and UCLA. If we leave, then for sure we're done.
Okay, shout out to Gambling Gauchos, the podcast. They do great work.
Yes.
Okay, on Twitter. I haven't listened to the pod itself.
They're hilarious. I was on their podcast last week.
There you go. Nice. I didn't know that. I listened to a Twitter space last night.
They're hilarious.
They invited people to talk, and a bunch of Utes talked, and it was pretty funny. This sort of anti-Utah rhetoric is pretty funny. But last night, they made a good point. They said, why do people think that the Big 12 is the one sort of ruining what's going on here? He's like, no, people plucked the Big 12. They plucked Nebraska, Missouri, Texas A&M, Texas and Oklahoma, Colorado. Like, they've been torched.
Yes.
And the fact that they're still standing and in a power position says a lot about the league. I thought that was a really interesting point.
Yes,
that I had
and
not
then
thought
they
about.
were shunned by George Kliavkoff and the Pac-12 after Texas and Oklahoma left.
Yes, and the whole alliance, they weren't in that because
No.
everyone thought they were dead.
Straight
They were
up.
not dead. In fact, they're in a power position. And listen, I despite these reports, I would still be surprised if the Pac-12 holds with the thin fishing line that is that streaming deal.
And the grant of rights, is the grant of rights somehow all of a sudden just better? Or is it like, okay, maybe Oregon and Washington aren't going to the Big Ten and Arizona's reversing course. Let's see if we can figure something out. We'll band together. We'll work together to try and, get this deal and maybe a little bit more, but let's just stay unified as a conference.
But
why?
What's keeping you unified? It needs to be enough
Outside of Cal,
money
Stanford,
and exposure.
Outside of Cal, Stanford, Oregon State, and Washington State, like every other team has an option. Like those four, I don't feel like have any options.
No one's saying, hey, Wazoo and the whatever.
So they're kind of like, yes, please stay together.
It'd be hilarious if like a Mountain West Conference reporter was like, the Mountain West has approved the inclusion of Cal and Stanford. Like no
Whether
one's
they want to or not.
Yeah,
it's been approved.
We didn't have, it's like us with like Kellen Moore. Like he is a BYU coaching candidate in the future.
It's Tony Finau.
No one's asked
Tony
Kellen
Finau
Moore.
didn't play golf for BYU. He committed to BYU, but he never played golf. But
Neither did Dale Murphy. We claimed Dale Murphy.
we claim both of them.
Dale didn't play here, but he went here for like
Whether
one
they want to be
semester.
Cougars or
Yeah.
not, we're going to report about
Yeah.
it because they were committed here.
Yeah. Imagine Dragons. We're like, dude, that's like a BYU band, man. No, it's different now.
No, it's a good analogy.
I still love them.
I don't know what has changed or why all of a sudden now when these teams were seemingly so far down the road, Oregon and Washington with the Big Ten and Arizona and the Big 12 and then Arizona State and Utah had
Like as a
been in
maybe-ish,
conversations like
yeah.
what could have possibly been said in this emergency Zoom meeting to
They
make
added
everybody
a zero to the streaming deal. That
everybody
they forgot.
reverse course? Like what was said? And was it, I mean, even as dramatic as now we are reporting that it is, that they're actually trying to circle the wagons and figure this out? Or is it, as we're now finding out in these very moments, that maybe they aren't actually circling the wagons?
Well, Jason Scheer in Arizona, is saying Arizona and Arizona State are still on track to join the Big 12. That is counter to the other reports of, nope, Pac-12's trying to, get a deal done. Well, the Pac-12 can still try and get a deal done, but this morning. Also, we aren't reporting jack squat. We're just reading tweets and opinionating. But like, let's see what happens here because this affects BYU. This affects the Big 12. Now, let's say somehow the Pac-12 just hangs on and they sign some grant of rights deal that's 3 or 4 years, and Colorado's already coming next year. I think the Big 12's still just fine moving forward. I thought they were before Colorado. Colorado helps, great, awesome. They don't need to add a UConn or a San Diego State to me. Like Brett Yormark has said, we want the Pacific time zone, da-da-da. Like, who is that team? Because Arizona is only 6 months of the year Pacific time zone, if you will. Like, is that enough? Does that check that box? I think he really means Oregon and Washington or somebody else. But it's like, who is he actually talking about when he's thinking Pacific time zone? Because there's not been a Stanford-Cal rumbling. There's not been a San Diego State big rumble. San Diego State and UConn right now are on pins and needles. They are hoping Oregon and Washington get invited to the Big Ten. San Diego State and SMU, so that they can go to the Pac-12. They are hoping, like BYU did, like we did, we needed a big domino here to get access. We thank Texas and Oklahoma in our BYUSN prayers because they left and BYU got that big.
Do San Diego State and SMU want to join a conference that potentially could have a core of 4 of Oregon State, Washington State, Stanford, and Cal? Like, is this an upgrade? If you have to pay $34 million to join that core of 4?
In the long run, yes, because they don't make much in their TV deal. But let's say they make $20 million a year. That's going to double what they probably make now. I don't really know what they make now, but I would think it's around 10 or 12.
Well, if the Big 12 did decide to pursue conversations with San Diego State, that could be a real thorn in the side to Pac-12 expansion. Like, Brett Yormark says, okay, we're not getting Arizona. Well, let's get into the West Coast, and let's get the Southern California market.
I wonder how that affects contractually the TV deal, because the pro rata applies to P5. Are they given, like, BYU and the other 3 newbies, like, half initially or something there?
Or maybe nothing because they have to be paid out of their Mountain West Conference deal, and then another $17 million, $34 million.
Well, that makes it tough to want to do that if you're San Diego State, right? But maybe in the long run, it's a net gain. I don't know. I would like San Diego State in the future in the Big 12. I think it'd be good to be in California. I think that's a quality, obviously, basketball program. Football program's been good for a while. You want to be in that market.
I would have no qualms if San Diego State joined the Big 12 as the 14th team.
I like it. Obviously, BYU has history there. And we have a rival, like you talk about natural conference rival, which I don't know why that's so forced. Like, why do you have to have a rival in league? Like, what Utah's done in the Pac-12, by the way, with like, hey, huge game with USC. It's like, yeah, they're not a rival, but they're a competitive rival. Like, Gonzaga became a competitive rival. St. Mary's was the actual rival in men's basketball. And then in women's soccer, it was Santa Clara. It was different. In women's hoops, it was Gonzaga. It was both. So it kind of depends by sport. But in football, yeah, you can go right away to like, we have history with San Diego State. We don't even care about the history with TCU. We don't go, it is TCU. Even though BYU's been in 2 leagues with TCU, now 3.
To me, there is clearly only one Pac-12 team that is all in, or at least I thought they were all in as of last night and this morning, and that is Arizona.
Yeah.
So maybe they're just waiting to see what happens with Oregon and Washington so that they don't have to be
Oregon and Washington have always been the power brokers here.
Arizona doesn't want to be the match or the firework that starts the brush fire and starts the wildfire.
Spark that lights the rebellion.
They don't. And I understand that. It's like, well, we don't want to be the final reason that the Pac-12 ultimately disbands and goes away. So maybe we'll just wait and see. But it feels like they're pretty much all in. Outside of that, I don't know any other Pac-12 team that feels like, yeah, we're bought in, which doesn't meet the criteria that Brett Yormark set up when he was on our show. I mean, he said, we're not looking at teams that just want more money or a better TV deal. Like, we're not about that.
That screams Arizona State Utah.
We want teams that embrace the Big 12 ideals, that are excited to be in our conference, that bring great value in football and basketball.
And will add equestrian.
And frankly, push us further into the West. He also said that. Yeah, so Arizona does all of those things. Arizona State and Utah, why? If you're begrudgingly like, yeah, it's a good backup plan, I guess. What? Why? Does the Big 12 have to accommodate? No. Do you have to?
No.
Well, I had a bunch of people telling me yesterday, like, Spencer, you got to see the big picture. Like, even if they're not excited about it right now, like, you can build those relationships and you can make it more lucrative, and it'll be good for the conference eventually. Like, I don't know that it would be.
Well, I can't wait for the Pac-12 to add non-research institutions. Then that card just goes out, you know? I'm waiting for that day.
I just don't. Brett Yormark does not seem like that guy to want to engage his staff and the Big 12 regents and the presidents of the schools to be like, yeah, like, I know they're not very excited and doesn't seem like they want to be in the conference, but I think it's a good move for us.
Always a good plan to add a begrudging partner. Always works out, never ends in divorce.
It seems weird, unless maybe he's like, well, we probably want to deal with that president forever, or like we can manufacture a working relationship now and hope that it gets better in the future. But
no,
you don't have to.
Just get the ones that really want it. Yeah,
that's why I would take San Diego State right now over Utah and Arizona State, because they are desperate and excited and want to be in and would probably figure out a way to pay the $34 million so that they could get into the conference.
Yeah, that's their thing to figure out.
And it grants the Big 12 the West Coast and Southern California, which the Pac-12 would not have. Like, adding San Diego State would deal a blow to the Pac-12. It would.
Because they're relying on San Diego State later
to get them back into Southern California.
Yes, and to get to like 10 teams or 12.
So if it's not Arizona, my pick is San Diego State.
Yeah. Listen, the show. I can bring you in.
Is it even good to get to 14? Like, I feel like the Big 12 needs to get to 14. Like, it feels like a natural, even number. It's way easier for scheduling.
I don't think you have to right now, but I think it'd be nice to get to an even number.
Which is our question of the day. If the Pac-12 stays together, do you still want the Big 12 to pick up a 14th team? And if so, which team?
I don't see like, why would UConn come into this equation? That feels
basketball dominance.
Right.
And the New York-ish market.
Let's not play that Rutgers card. We added Rutgers because New York City.
Well, UConn's different than Rutgers.
Right, but it's not New York market. Like, it isn't.
The Northeast.
On the weekends it is when they go into the city.
Yeah, sorry. Brett Yormark has said he desires to be in the Northeast. And UConn would certainly do that.
I think he wants Pacific.
I believe that too.
That.
UConn doesn't cost $34 million.
Memphis
though.
and UNLV are outsiders, yeah.
UConn costs about $10 million, and San Diego State costs $34 million. So
that's their problem to figure out over time. That's not the league's problem.
At Big 12 Brigham on Twitter says, Arizona is by far the best option.
Yeah.
I think we all agree. Great basketball, improving football. Yeah, Jed Fish is a good coach. Great similar fan base, LDS presence, geographic fit close to Phoenix. Fun new rivalry, and a few less 8:15 p.m. starts at LaVell Edwards Stadium. It would give Arizona that late window.
Depends what time of year it is.
He continues, the Big 12, the conference of cat-themed mascots, Wildcats.
That's what they're going for.
Keep it going.
A Kansas State fan last night on that Twitter space for Gambling Gauchos was like, wow, there'd be a second Wildcats. I don't know.
Dave Osmond on Facebook says, I actually think San Diego State makes sense. Basketball is solid. Football continues to strengthen. It's the right market, and the Pac wants them too.
I think if you get to 16, I think it should be one of them. I don't think they should be the 14th team, but I think they should be the 15th.
Or 16th?
Or 16th.
Okay. Yeah. Hashtag BYUSN, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Do you want the Big 12 to continue to get to 14 if Arizona pulls away from the table? And if so, who do you want it to be?